Hello, welcome to season 3 of the Digital Rights Africa podcast, where we talk about everything data protection and privacy, child online protection, cybersecurity, intellectual property rights, and data governance across Africa. On this episode, as usual, I am your host, Teki Akuetteh, and I have been joined by
Caliis Nii Oman Badoo, and I work with the Securities and Exchange Commission with the Legal Enforcement Department.
Where are you based, Caliis?
Accra,
Okay.
Ghana.
So Caliis is really joining us from Accra, Ghana. And I'm very, very excited because I also know that he's a lawyer and he practices in the space. So that's one of the reasons I lured him to come and have this conversation with us today. Caliis, you have been, also at the forefront of Ghana's adoption of data protection laws, among other digital rights laws broadly. What do you really think? Do you think we're getting it right? Are we getting there? And I would really love that you look at this from the legal, you're a lawyer, you've been a legal practitioner as well. Where do you think we are in this whole data protection space?
I generally think compliance is average because it is a space that is very technical. So a lot of people are still getting used to the space. Lawyers in particular are struggling because there are no guides so far for the profession. So the regulators are finding it a little easy, especially those in the finance space. They have all these experts who help guide them for their licensees. So generally lawyers are doing okay, but we believe with a little more education they could do better.
But I know you as well sit on the committee of the IBA's Africa Forum. And I know you've done some work there. Do you think that work that you did at the forum helped demystify data protection a bit? And can you tell us about how that is going?
Yes, I think it did help. We had a good panel of experts in Paris for the recently ended IBA conference. And one of the key topics that we dealt with was data protection challenges within the AfCFTA. And I thought that the panel brought a lot of information to bear. There were a lot of questions which showed interest in the area. And I think it's a start. We are moving on to another level of data protection in digital, what do you call it? Artificial intelligence.
Okay.
So that was a very good panel that we had, and it was very interesting.
Well, I think I really love that you've brought up the Africa Free Trade Continental area. It's come up a few times on this podcast, but I don't think we've really had the opportunity to dig a bit into it. What are some of the issues or challenges that may have come up from your discussions in Paris?
I think the major challenge is how to harmonize the various frameworks that are floating on the continent. That's the first thing. And then the second key thing is how to get majority of our businesses that are within the medium to small scale enterprises regime to comply. That's a major challenge. And if we are looking at the fact that if you do a comparison of the ratios in the sector, most of our businesses are within that space and they don't have the capacity, they don't have the capital, and they don't even have the knowledge to be able to comply with some of these newly adopted protocols and laws generally. So I think the major challenge is harmonization, how we are all going to help comply with this regime, and then two, how to bring those down there up to scratch to be able to comply with the
Let me
protocols.
dig your mind around this issue of harmonization, because a number of people have looked at harmonization from different perspectives. For some people, look, we should have a uniform law. For some people, look, it's already complex as it is. Let's see what we have there and see how we can build bridges to forge ahead. And what is your perspective around these?
I think most of the principles on data protection are fairly well known. So instead of waiting for one particular instrument to mature for all of us to follow, and looking at the fact that not all countries on the continent have these regimes, it may be better to lay out the principles clearly and then allow people to transit, do some kind of transitional arrangement to get countries that do not have these regimes to match up so that the regime can take off within the AfCFTA. Because it is so crucial, without data protection laws, we can move, data across in terms of providing services across the continent.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Let me move to the MSME challenge that you focused on. Because of course, if you're looking at it from the protocol on digital trade and e-commerce, that's a high level document, and the negotiations, is left at the country level by the governments and all of that. And even if there are elements of data protection and the like, it will be left to the implementation of the governments, right, to implement it. So what are your thoughts? And do you think that our countries that have actually signed up, that are in negotiations around these protocols, are they really ready, and are they looking at these issues?
I would say some countries obviously are ready, some others are not. But if we can have trade going on within just a section of the continent, so we have to find a way to bring everybody together so that we can start. I think the Malabo Convention is a good way to start. We have a number of countries that have signed. The principles there are quite clear. So we can begin with a minimum number of countries, and then we can take off as we try to get the others to come to the level.
By the way, the Malabo Convention, it has become effective because we had the 15th, I believe, ratification sometime around June as well. So we are all eager and anxious to see what implementation would look like. But having said that, a lot of the time when we're having these discussions, it's very quick to look to governments and government institutions and governmental bodies to say, oh, they have to do this, they have to do that. You belong to a particular community that I think is very important in all of this, and that's the legal fraternity. What role do you think the legal fraternity can play in actually enabling these things?
Like I said, the legal fraternity in Ghana hasn't done too well. I think there are some few established law firms that are complying with the data protection requirements in terms of getting certificates to be able to keep clients' records, etc. But the key thing is education. We need institutions like the Africa Digital Rights Hub to collaborate with the bar associations so that they can roll out some kind of information or education regarding this area at annual conferences, because data protection has become very, very key. And unfortunately, not all the firms are ready. The firms that are average sized, they have corresponding firms across the countries, are forced to comply. But those that are locally based have very little compliance. So I think the first thing is education. Another thing is that I think about 2 years ago, you did some work with the IBA to roll out some kind of a data protection guide for African lawyers. That's very key, and we can start from that level. We can start by expatiating on the guide for bar associations across the continent, and then when they get it, they can now take it down to their clients at various conferences. I think that can be a start.
That's quite interesting way of looking at it. Also, I want to dig a bit around the role of the lawyer vis-a-vis implementation of the law and also enforcement, right? Are we seeing the kind of challenges that we see in the implementation and the enforcement and the compliance space, also because lawyers are not necessarily fully equipped to appreciate these laws?
I think so. I think so. And the interesting thing is that when you speak to them, they show interest in getting to know more about it. And the more you know about it, the more you are able to comply and even assist clients comply with these things. So I think the lawyers can do better, but they themselves must be equipped. And implementation has not been easy. There are some law firms that don't have any data protection, but my office, for example, the firm we use, anytime they send us information, they give us consent, they give us education on data protection, our records, etc. So you know that there are some few that are doing well, but others are way below the line, and we need to get them up to scratch.
And I really believe that if we also want to push, particularly civil society and all of that, if we want to push for enforcement, right, of these laws, we have to definitely equip the lawyers. But you are a legal practitioner as well. Where do you think we can start if we're looking at this? I know we've looked at the guide and all of that, but apart from the guide, where else can we start?
I think, I would use the SEC as an example. I think last year we issued a set of guidelines for all companies applying for licenses to obtain a data protection certificate.
Okay.
The General Legal Counsel can start with that. Because once you are required to present a data protection certificate for your firm as part of your licensing requirement, you have to now read what the provisions are. And then you see the importance of, getting enough instruments in place so that you can renew successfully. So I think that's the first thing. We have to include it and make it a requirement for registration or renewing your chambers license or your, office license. I think that's the first start. The second start is that right after that, we have a lot of CLEs coming up. We can get people like you who are experts to come and share your experience.
I must say I've done a few, maybe broadly around digital transformation, data protection, but probably I need to make more time.
Yes, and I think it's like I said, once you get lawyers at one place and you push this information to them, not all of them will take it, but at least you have provided the information. So when implementation starts, nobody can say, I didn't get enough education, etc. So I think as a registration requirement, that's the first thing. And then the second thing is education. That will bring up the compliance rate.
Yeah, but another thing is that data protection, in as much as we see the role of the lawyers, is also a highly specialized area. Such that even if you are a lawyer and you're in, in another area of the law, I don't think you want to be bothered with things like data protection impact assessments and, data transfer mechanisms and all those things. So should we also be thinking around probably looking at people who find this area interesting, or finding other expertise and pushing them on board?
I think so. The specialization is the way forward. Recently, I think the University of Ghana Law School has introduced about 19 programs for LLM and another 19 for MBs. One is in IT.
Yes.
So we have to start getting people interested in the space to be able to specialize. But aside that, we need to employ people who have that expertise in the firms. You see, you need to establish something like a desk in all the banks and other financial sector institutions. They have desks for anti-money laundering officers.
Yes.
We need to start raising data protection to that level.
In fact, most of the laws actually require you to have a data protection supervisor, for instance. And usually the requirement is to make that individual or role known and available to people or data users so that they can contact in case of anything. But I think I agree with what you're saying. So just continue. Let me not cut your thread.
Yeah. So I think that's the way forward. You know, you hire people who have the knowledge in the area. They help you establish the framework within your office until you all get to the understanding of data protection. I think that's going to help. Lawyers cannot specialize everywhere. I may be interested in financial markets, another person is interested in data protection. So we need to synthesize and then share ideas. So we can start with a desk for a data protection officer. In my office, we have 2 people responsible for that because the law requires that. So I think it should apply to everybody.
Very well. I was going to, because you were mentioning this issue of data protection supervisors and all of that. And of course, in other jurisdictions, looking at the sheer capacity that is required, because in some jurisdictions, for instance, the data protection supervisor almost plays the role as a regulator within the organization. And so because of the sheer requirements of organizations and the numbers, right, even in places like Europe and the like, they allow for maybe, I won't call it certification, but they allow for it to be provided as an expert service. Do you think that this is an area law firms should be looking at as well, particularly for the MSMEs, right? Yeah. So that you're providing that supervisory role as a service outside of, and, you know, of course, lawyers like to think about money. So maybe this will be linked to it. But what do you think around that?
I think that's a great idea. You know, you always start somewhere. You know, you have to start from somewhere. So if we have experts who are going to be outsourcing these functions from their position of strength and then charge just a little, it helps you because, you know, maintaining one person in the office paying all kinds of taxes and social security can be expensive. So if the service can be outsourced, the person can come in and, you know, provide the expertise and help train somebody to, you know, get the institutional memory to take it from there going forward.
Caliis, thank you so much for joining us. I'll just give you an opportunity to just give us some final words, maybe something that is, you know, you're deeply concerned about, that you think our community should know about, or some parting words, or whatever it is, just a few minutes for that.
I think we have to take data protection very seriously. There's an event that happened in Singapore. A bank's ATM went down for 10 hours, out of which 1.5 hours was during working hours. The bank was made to hold $230 million a month just as backup. Now, that's how things can be. You have a lot of data. Data is gold. So if there's a breach, the kind of damage that can be done, nobody can tell. So we should all take steps to take this subject as a very serious subject. If we need help, we should seek expert advice, and that is the way that we should go.
Thank you so much, Caliis, for joining us. And you heard it from him. This is not Teki or the Africa Digital Rights Hub once again backing data protection, data protection, data protection. It is an extremely important subject, and we will continue to have these conversations. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward for you joining us in the next episode. If you haven't subscribed to our page yet, please do well to subscribe before I'm fired from my job. Thank you.